The last thing Ambassador Alira Vance remembered before the gas hissed through the ventilation system was the way Volgoth smiled when she refused to bow. It wasn't just arrogance in his grin, it was certainty, the kind born from traps long set. She should have seen it. Earth's peace envoy hadn't walked into a negotiation. She had walked into a trophy case, and her face was just another space on the wall waiting to be filled. The guards dropped first, their armor clanging against the polished alloy floor of the Zenthra station's main negotiation dome. She stood her ground, coughing but unbroken, as the hunters closed in around her. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She just locked eyes with Volgoth and said, voice hoarse but clear, "You don't know what you've started." Volgoth laughed, reaching for the cuffs himself, eager to claim the prize. They thought taking Earth's voice would make the galaxy go quiet. What they didn't know was that Earth's silence was never empty. It was loaded. Half a system away, a low beep echoed inside a hidden command chamber buried beneath Earth's polar command bunker. Director Marakeen stood alone, face illuminated by a single monitor. On it, just 2 words blinked in red: Vance taken. She didn't blink. Didn't call a meeting. Didn't even sip her coffee. Instead, she reached under her desk, pulled out a biometric panel, and placed her hand on it. There was a brief hiss of recognition, then a wall section clicked and slid open silently. Inside was a narrow hallway lit only by cold blue light. At the end of it stood a door with no markings. She walked to it, paused, and typed a code that didn't exist in any record. The door unsealed with a soft sigh of pressure. Inside stood a man. Or maybe something less definable. No insignia. No name. Just black boots, a lightweight matte suit, and eyes that didn't move until she spoke. "They took her," she said. "And they think no one will follow." He didn't respond. Didn't ask who? Didn't ask where? He just tilted his head slightly, then disappeared into the dark. There were no planes fueled. No files pulled. No announcements. Just silence. That was enough. Earth didn't broadcast its intentions. It deployed them. The hunters were already transmitting their propaganda. Alira Vance, Earth's most prominent voice of diplomacy, bound and shackled before the camera, with Volgoth grinning like he just shot a god. Across galactic channels, species whispered that Earth must now submit. That peace had failed. But those who had truly faced humans in war said nothing. They knew better. They remembered whispers of a weapon not on any register. They remembered a name passed between dying enemies like a curse. Moth. Alira, meanwhile, sat still in her cell, hands behind her back, ankles bound, the air thick with the musk of rot and engine coolant. She studied the angles of the camera placed in the corner, knowing it didn't just record, it interpreted. They wanted fear. She gave them stillness. Volgoth visited often. He liked hearing himself. Liked the echo of his boots on the steel floors. Liked the way the guards flinched every time he moved. He called Earth cowardly. Weak. Obsessed with peace. And Alira just nodded as if bored, then offered him corrections to his vocabulary. "That's not cowardice," she said. "That's control." He thought her arrogant. He was wrong. She was simply informed. What no one understood was that Earth had prepared for this very scenario years ago. Not because it feared the hunters in particular, but because it feared what the galaxy might do when brute power was all that mattered. Earth's governments were fractured, its cultures diverse, and its military sometimes loud. But deep within its systems, someone had built something else. Someone had written a protocol called Vesper. A failsafe. Not a counterattack. A removal. And Moth was its knife. He entered the Zenthra outpost undetected, not because he cloaked himself in tech, but because he understood how light worked, how shadows behaved, how attention drifted. 2 guards stationed outside the exterior service tunnel were found asleep, uniforms still crisp, comms still on, yet both with scrambled memories. They wouldn't remember a thing. Just a chill. An unease. By the time Volgoth's security grid logged the first anomaly, a glitch in a maintenance door subroutine, Moth had already mapped the compound's airlocks, watched every patrol route, and lifted 7 access cards without ever touching a single body. Inside her cell, Alira noticed something. A subtle shift in air pressure. A flicker in the hallway lights. She turned her eyes, not her head, and counted to 3. A piece of lint floated sideways in the corner. Not from breeze. From displacement. Her lips curled into a quiet smile. They'd underestimated Earth's silence. Again. Back in the compound's central operations room, an alarm flickered on for half a second, then shut off. No sound. Just a record. A tech officer frowned and rebooted his panel. As he did, the entire system restarted. Power surged, then dipped. Monitors cut out and returned. On one screen, security footage showed an empty hallway. Then a flash. A shadow that wasn't a shadow. The tech officer didn't even get to finish the word, intruder, before his headset fizzled out. Volgoth was summoned. He barked orders. Lock every floor. Triple the guard on the prisoner. Initiate drone sweeps. But the drones didn't launch. Not because they were hacked. Because someone had quietly removed their core guidance chips hours before. Volgoth stared at the black screen and muttered, "It's Sabotage." A lieutenant corrected him. "Sir, the logs say there was no breach." Volgoth's fists clenched. He was beginning to understand that the silence wasn't absence. It was precision. Meanwhile, Moth moved like memory. Already deep within the ventilation levels, he paused only once, to retrieve a small silver coin. On it was the mark of the Vesper Protocol. Not official. Not legal. Just final. He studied the layout sketched into his glove's inner membrane. Alira's cell was 5 levels down, past 2 reinforced bulkheads, behind a retina-locked gate. None of that mattered. What mattered was timing. When the third generator's surge triggered a momentary feedback loop in the security system, he would have 12 seconds of open access. No alarms. No logs. Just a window. Alira looked at the guard outside her cell, a young one. Probably new. Nervous. He checked his weapon twice in the last minute. She tilted her head and asked gently, "Do you know what comes after silence?" He blinked. "What?" she repeated. "After silence. What comes next?" He shook his head, confused. She leaned forward, voice a whisper. "Correction." Then, somewhere above them, a single light bulb popped. And the hallway went dark. ChatGPT said. The outer perimeter of the Hunter compound was built to withstand orbital bombardment, breaching pods, biological infiltration, and the full weight of siege. What it was not built for was a single human who did not move like prey. Moth reached the edge of the west maintenance corridor without making a sound. The alloy under his boots was pressure sensitive, but he already knew the panel sequences to step on. The motion scanners embedded in the archways operated on time-based sweep intervals. He moved between them like vapor, like something the sensors couldn't agree on. A flicker. A disturbance. Maybe a glitch. He wasn't even listed as a probability in the Hunter threat models. He preferred it that way. Inside the surveillance room, Grot, the compound's security chief, stared at the blinking status monitors with growing frustration. He was thick-necked, short-tempered, and had never once lost a target. But today the system kept pinging ghost movements near the power maintenance wing, and every time he sent a team to check, they found nothing. Just a door slightly ajar. A camera temporarily scrambled. A patrol route that didn't log properly. He cursed the engineers and slammed his meaty fist on the console. You don't survive the Hunter ranks by losing track of air. Either it was a software glitch, or someone was in their walls. But that was impossible. Right. Moth entered through a subhatch that no one had used in years. It led into a discarded power routing tunnel, barely shoulder width and riddled with obsolete wiring. He moved with careful steps, his breath barely audible, limbs wrapped in reactive mesh that mimicked ambient temperature. He heard the soft crackle of a Hunter guard's boots 3 meters above him and paused. The sound faded. He continued. Every 90 seconds he checked the route against the imprint map on his glove, a series of glowing nodes programmed to pulse with the station's heartbeat. The fortress was not just stone and steel. It breathed. And he moved between its breaths. Back in the prisoner wing, Elira sat calmly in her cell as a minor tremor passed beneath the floor. She didn't react, but the young guard pacing outside her cell did. He stopped mid-step and looked around. "Did you feel that?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly turned her head toward the hallway and said, "Someone's here." He scoffed, but his hand drifted to his sidearm anyway. The hallway lights flickered again. Once. Then stabilized. But in that half-second of darkness, the security camera at the end of the hall recorded something strange. A distortion, like heat shimmer, right at the corner. The guard didn't see it. But the camera did. And in the ops room, Grot saw it too. Moth reached the second-level bulkhead and extracted a chip from his belt. It wasn't a hack tool. It was a memory core from a captured hunter officer. Earth's Intel Division had loaded it with false clearances, but more importantly, it pulsed with behavioral mimicry. The door's scanner didn't care who you were if your presence felt right. As the retinal gate scanned him, Moth held still. The scan completed. The gate clicked. He didn't smile. Just stepped through. Grot, now on edge, began rerouting patrols. The compound's drones still wouldn't respond. That wasn't just strange. It was terrifying. He sent 3 teams to sweep the core vents, even though he had no reason to believe anyone could fit through them. That was when one of the officers reported a missing rifle. Not a fallen rifle. Not damaged. Just missing. Grot's blood ran cold. Someone had been inside the armory. For 6 minutes. The timestamp matched the camera glitch. This wasn't sabotage. This was something else. Something patient. Precise. Deadly. Elsewhere in the compound, Kieran sat quietly in the technician's ward, eyes half-lidded as he listened to the chaos growing over the internal comms. He knew that rhythm. Panic masked as protocol. Kieran had seen this once before, long ago on a derelict ship Earth had retaken from pirates without firing a shot. That crew had gone mad thinking ghosts were among them. When they found the single human operator responsible, he was sitting in their mess hall eating soup. Now, hearing the huntmaster growl orders and watching the monitors glitch one by one, Kieran smiled. Earth hadn't sent an army. It had sent a shadow. He reached under his bench and flicked off 2 relay switches. Just a little help. Nothing direct. No fingerprints. But enough. Moth paused outside the interrogation annex. He had 13 seconds before the security sweep reset the magnetic locks. He slid a mirror probe under the door and scanned the room. 2 guards. One seated. One standing. Both distracted. The one standing was talking, about what Moth didn't care. He pushed the door open a fraction, angled his hand, and fired a silent neural dart that hit the standing guard behind the ear. The man dropped. The seated one blinked, turned, then went still as the lights cut out. Moth moved in. When they returned, the room was empty. Grot finally sounded the internal lockdown. It was too late. Every section had already been compromised. Someone had routed fire suppression gas into the barracks. Several guards were unconscious. Others reported dizziness. The main lift froze mid-level. Half the doors had overridden their own locks. Grot ordered manual backup, but the manual switchboards had been physically disabled. Not destroyed. Just removed. The maintenance officer screamed that it was impossible. Grot barked for them to find the prisoner. But she was still in her cell. Or so they thought. Moth moved under the floor plating with Elira close behind. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Her ankles were unshackled. Her posture upright. They crawled side by side through a tunnel not even mapped in the hunter's own systems. Every 30 feet, he paused to listen. At one point, a hunter stepped above them, his boot echoing through the panel. Elira held her breath. Moth didn't. He stayed perfectly still, eyes open. Unblinking. The hunter moved on. In the central war room, Volgos stood seething at the footage. There were no faces. No sound. Just shadows that weren't there the second time you watched. Guards falling without cause. Doors that never logged opening. The prisoner gone, yet the sensors said she hadn't moved. He demanded answers. Grodd had none. The system had been dismantled without being touched. Volgoth shouted, "Tell me how someone breaks into a fortress without ever being seen." Kirin, now standing at the edge of the room, simply said, "Maybe they didn't break in. Maybe they were always inside." Volgoth turned to glare at him, but by then, Kirin had already vanished into the hallway. By the time they realized the escape was in motion, Moth and Elira were 4 levels below, nearing the auxiliary shuttle bay. There were no guards posted there anymore. Moth had ensured their transfer orders looked authentic. Elira looked at him once, her voice steady. "Did they train you to be this silent?" Moth said nothing. Just handed her a comm band. She slipped it on. It synced immediately. Earth was listening. One signal blinked green. They were almost home. Above them, alarms screamed for a threat already gone. The war room was no longer a command center. It had become a theater of chaos, a place where voices shouted over each other while monitors flashed red warnings faster than anyone could read them. Volgoth paced like a beast caged in his own fortress, tail lashing, fangs bared, but every barked order only revealed how little control he actually had. The cameras were blind. The drones were dead. Guards were unconscious or missing. The prisoner was gone, yet her cell logs still said occupied. Someone had rewritten reality inside his own stronghold, and for the first time in years, the hunter commander tasted something he had not allowed himself to feel since youth. Fear. The ventilation system had been flushed with coolant, a move that should have frozen out any invader. Yet the sensors registered no change. There were faint heat trails, barely distinguishable from static, all moving against airflow. When Grodd tried to trace them, the program crashed. The engineer beside him muttered that the thermal anomaly was wrong, as if the figure moved with a heartbeat slower than any humanoid could survive. Grodd ignored him and rebooted the system manually, but deep inside he knew that whatever was down there, it wasn't hunting like prey. It was moving like a surgeon with a scalpel, cutting pieces from their foundation. Moth and Elira moved in complete silence through the now vacated eastern maintenance corridors. The alarm patterns had shifted again, locking down areas already empty while leaving escape routes untouched. Moth had predicted this. Not by guesswork but by pattern. He understood that panic did not create random noise, it created predictable overcompensation. He knew that when cornered, leaders like Volgoth would overcorrect. Their confidence would shift from strategy to emotion. And in that gap he moved. Elira followed without question. She kept pace, eyes focused, breath controlled. The diplomat was no soldier, but she had spent years watching generals in boardrooms and warlords behind polished tables. She recognized control when she saw it. And right now, the man in front of her was not responding to danger, he was dictating it. They passed through a corridor lined with armored suits that had once held elite hunter guards. Every pod was open. Empty. The guards? All off duty. All ordered to reassign. A fake memo Moth had planted 12 hours before even arriving. Back in the comms center, a single operator stared at an open message log. Someone had accessed their outgoing channel and transmitted a blank file. Just silence. But the encryption was perfect, Earth tier, and the origin point untraceable. The technician called Grodd, his voice shaking. "We've been ghosted," he said. Grodd didn't understand. The technician explained that ghosting meant someone was already inside, manipulating from the core outward. Not brute forcing. Not hacking. Just walking through holes no one else even saw. Volgoth demanded answers from Kirin, who stood near the rear of the room, arms crossed, eyes calm. Kirin shrugged. Maybe Earth doesn't do brute strength. Maybe they do elegance. Volgoth roared that elegance wouldn't save Elira once she was found. Kirin smiled without warmth and said she's already been found. Volgoth turned to strike him, but Kirin didn't flinch. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, his steps unhurried. No one stopped him. Volgotha's hand hovered near his weapon but stayed there, trembling slightly. Meanwhile, Elira and Moth reached the shuttle hangar access gate. It was sealed, coded to require dual biometric confirmation and a voice authorization from command. Moth pulled 2 devices from his pouch. One was a copied retinal core from a senior officer who now slept soundly in a medical bay with no memory of the extraction. The other was a voice emitter, perfectly simulating Grott's gruff tone. He activated both in sync. The gate hissed open. Inside the hangar, 2 guards were posted near the only active cruiser. Moth watched from the shadows above, suspended in the support beams. Elira waited beneath him, still and alert. One of the guards sneezed. That was enough. Moth dropped like a falling whisper. The first guard didn't even react before he was unconscious. The second turned, weapon half raised, but a pulse round from Moth's palm flicked the rifle from his hand and spun him backward. Elira stepped forward and retrieved the access badge from his belt. As they approached the cruiser, Kieran appeared from the side corridor. He held up his hands. I figured you might need someone who can fly this bucket. Moth didn't move, but Elira looked at him carefully. You're defecting? She asked. Kieran laughed. I'm trading sides before your side wins. It's a better story that way. Moth gave the slightest nod. That was all Kieran needed. Back in the command center, Volgoth received the final blow. The hangar's external gate had been opened. From the inside. No one on his command team had the clearance. The override came from a buried protocol, one they didn't know existed. And through that gate, on a stolen hunter cruiser, Earth's Diplomat was now rising into the upper atmosphere, leaving nothing behind but a war room full of teeth and no bite. Volgoth screamed and smashed the monitor. His officers avoided his gaze. For the first time in his reign, no one answered his fury. They all knew. This wasn't a loss. This was humiliation. And somewhere deep in his spine, he felt it. Whoever had done this would come again, if pushed. And next time, they wouldn't leave with just the Diplomat. They'd leave with the lights turned off behind them. As the ship cleared the station's shadow and drifted into open space, Kieran piloted calmly, eyes scanning the screen. Elira sat beside him, adjusting the controls to send a beacon to Earth's outer fleet. Behind them, Moth stood still, watching the stars through the window. Elira turned slightly. You never said a word, she said. Not one. Moth didn't respond. She smiled. That's fine. Earth doesn't need noise. It needs certainty. Kieran glanced back once. You know, the galaxy's going to talk about this. No weapons. No bloodbath. Just one woman, one ghost, and one traitor. He grinned. That's going to sting. Elira leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Let them talk. Let them scream. Earth would remain silent. But the galaxy would never mistake that silence for peace again. The cruiser hummed steadily as it drifted beyond the gravity well of the station, its engines pulsing low and quiet like a heartbeat finally slowing after a sprint. The stars outside the window bled into streaks of light as the vessel entered slipstream. Inside, the tension hadn't eased. Elira sat upright in the passenger seat, still bound by the instinct of diplomacy, though her hands were free now. She stared at the navigation data, reading the route twice over. They were heading toward a rendezvous point in the dark zone between known systems, a blind spot where no satellites tracked movement, no empire held claim, and no laws applied. A place built for disappearances. It was where Moth had planned to vanish once his task was complete. But now she was with him, and Kieran, the grinning defector, sat at the helm pretending this was just another freelance job. The 3 of them made an unlikely crew. One didn't speak, one didn't trust, and one didn't care. And yet, together, they'd pulled off the impossible. Kieran adjusted course slightly, brushing his fingers across the navigation console with practiced ease. He whistled a tune no one recognized, something old and offbeat. You know, he said without turning, the last guy who tried sneaking out of Volgotha's fortress ended up with half a leg and a bounty so big entire moons went into debt trying to catch him. Elira looked at him sideways. What happened to him? Kieran smirked. He's sitting in this chair now. She didn't laugh, but something in her expression softened. A twitch, maybe? Something close to amusement. Moth, as always, stood silent in the background, watching the stars, calculating something no one could see. They were 30 minutes from the rendezvous point when Kieran's console flickered. He frowned and tapped the side twice. A warning flashed, low-level interference. Then a ping. Multiple ships. No call sign. No approach vector. Just shadows on the edge of space. Kieran muttered something under his breath and pulled up the visuals. 4 hunter craft. They had no reason to patrol this dead space unless they tracked the cruiser. Unless they'd known exactly where it would go. Which meant someone had whispered it to them. Alira stiffened. Her eyes shifted to Kieran, but he raised both hands. Don't look at me like that. I defected. I didn't turn stupid. If I'd betrayed you, I'd be halfway to the Merc 9 zone with a bottle in my hand, not sitting in this flying coffin. She didn't respond, but Moth did. Without a word, he moved to the secondary terminal and tapped 3 points into the interface. The console shimmered and rebooted with a different operating layout. Earth Black Ops code. Kieran blinked. That's not standard protocol. What the hell is that? Alira's voice was calm. That's called Plan Echo. It's the part of the plan that comes into effect when we realize we've been followed. Kieran shook his head. And you just let it run like it's a normal Tuesday? Moth didn't wait. He was already moving. He disappeared into the narrow corridor that led to the weapons bay. Alira rose and followed him halfway. She paused at the threshold and looked back. We're not outrunning them, are we? Kieran sighed and locked the controls. No. But we might not need to. Depends on what your ghost has up his sleeve. As the first hunter ship entered visible range, alarms blared. The main cruiser's shields shimmered faintly. The hunters didn't hail. They didn't warn. They just opened fire. The first blast rocked the cruiser hard to port. Alira grabbed the edge of a seat to stay upright while Kieran cursed and spun the vessel away from a second impact. The hull creaked but held. In the weapons bay, Moth activated a module no one else had seen before. Hidden beneath the floor of the cargo hold was a payload, small and spherical, with Earth seal etched into its surface. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a projector. Moth linked it to the ship's signal array and returned to the cockpit with the device in hand. Kieran saw it and frowned. What's that supposed to do? Hypnotize them into submission? Alira shook her head. It's not for them. It's for everyone else. Moth activated the device, and the signal broadcast pulsed outward in all directions. A coded burst, embedded with live footage and encrypted identification tags. In under 10 seconds, the message reached 6 independent relay points and 1 UN orbital archive. The footage showed the moment Alira had been abducted. The compound's layout. The security failures. Volgotha's face, speaking to the camera, boasting of Earth's humiliation. And then, frames of the escape. Not full ones, just hints. A shadow. A flicker. A whisper. But enough to show what Earth had done. The hunters continued to fire, but the moment the signal went live, the fourth ship peeled off. Then the second. The remaining 2 held their position but didn't fire. Kieran stared at the radar. They're getting scared, he muttered. Alira didn't smile, but her voice was steel. That's the point. Volgotha's rule isn't built on fact. It's built on fear. Now they've seen someone fear him more than we fear them. Moth remained still, eyes on the ships. After a long moment, the last 2 cruisers turned and left. No shots. No message. Just retreat. The signal had done what weapons couldn't. It had made them doubt. The slipstream stabilized again. Kieran slumped into his chair. I'm not used to not dying when people shoot at me. It's a weird feeling. Alira leaned back. Earth didn't want war. But we'll let the galaxy know exactly what war would cost. And we'll do it without raising our voice. That's why they sent him. Kieran nodded slowly. Yeah. I get it now, Not a soldier. Not a spy. A scalpel. Moth deactivated the projector, returned to the rear of the cabin, and sat down for the first time since they'd launched. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But something in the air shifted, like a ripple closing in water. Alira looked at him for a moment longer, then finally allowed herself to exhale. Earth had gotten its voice back. But more importantly, it had reminded the galaxy that silence from humans never meant surrender. It meant calculation, precision, and the quiet before correction. Ask ChatGPT. The broadcast circled the galaxy like a wave with no center. Systems on the far fringe of civilized space received it as a flicker in their news feeds, a strange pulse of video footage containing a mix of raw surveillance, edited moments, and stills tagged with Earth's seal. It didn't name names, didn't issue threats, and didn't ask for sympathy. It simply showed what had been done. It showed Earth's most prominent diplomat in chains and the face of her captor laughing into the camera. Then it showed that same diplomat walking out unharmed, with no visible army behind her, no explosions, no wreckage. Only silence and retreat. The message didn't brag. It just ended. And that was what made it terrifying. On Volgotha's stronghold, the war room was dead quiet. None of the usual buzzing displays, no shouting officers, no weapons checks. Grot stood in the corner staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched. The security team had all reviewed the footage and knew exactly how bad it looked. The hunters prided themselves on being untouchable, on being feared not just for their strength but their control. And now the whole galaxy had seen that control dismantled in silence. There had been no massive Earth fleet, no swarm of drones, no orbital strikes. Just one man with no name and one diplomat who refused to break. Volgoth hadn't spoken in hours. He watched the video on a loop, face unreadable, the flicker of the screen casting deep shadows across his eyes. In the outer sectors, neutral systems began to change their diplomatic status with Earth. Stations that had refused human docking rights quietly lifted their bans. Traders from Earth were welcomed more warmly. One syndicate even offered Earth temporary escort services for their diplomatic shuttles. These were not peace offerings. These were fear acknowledgments. Earth had not started a war, but it had sent a clear message. It would not be humiliated, not by force, and not by show. It would answer humiliation with correction. And its answers would never come loud. At the UN dome on Earth, the council chamber buzzed with quiet murmurs as Alira Vance walked to the center platform. The seats were full, diplomats from every allied and neutral planet watching with barely concealed awe. She stood tall, the same calm expression she'd worn through negotiations, imprisonment, and escape still resting on her face. She adjusted the microphone once, then spoke. She said there was a moment during her captivity when she realized her captors didn't understand humans at all. That they saw kindness as softness, and diplomacy as cowardice. She said they believed that by silencing Earth's voice, they could silence Earth's will. But what they never grasped was that Earth had never relied on noise. When Earth was quiet, it was planning. And when Earth moved, it didn't do so with thunder. It moved like wind through cracks. A whisper under the door. A pressure in the room you couldn't quite place. She finished her statement with one final line. Earth does not retaliate loudly. We simply correct the mistake. Then she stepped down. No applause followed. Just silence. The most respectful kind. In a secure room elsewhere in the same building, Director Mara Keen sat before a black glass screen. The footage from the extraction was stored in encrypted vaults, accessible to only a few. She reviewed every second, her eyes tracking Moth's movements with forensic attention. There was no moment wasted, no breath out of rhythm, no hesitation. She reached for her console and opened the personnel file tagged with a single codename. Moth. Then she did something very few ever witnessed. She deleted it. Entirely. Wiped from the system. Not to hide him from enemies, but to protect Earth from using him too often. Weapons like that weren't built to be deployed. They were built to exist only when there was no other way. Elsewhere, in a quiet cafe tucked between two transit towers, Moth sat at an outside table. He wore civilian clothing, nothing fancy, just nondescript layers that blended into the flow of the city. A waiter brought him tea. He nodded once, gave no thanks, and sipped in silence. Around him, life continued. Children laughed nearby. A delivery drone buzzed overhead. A man across the street argued with a kiosk over pricing. None of them noticed the man who had just rewritten diplomatic history with no witnesses, no credit, and no demands. Alira entered the cafe 10 minutes later, dressed plainly, no escorts. She took the seat across from him and placed a small device on the table. It displayed an encrypted message from the UN Council. They had voted to issue a formal statement. Not about the attack, not about the hunters, but about peace. The kind of peace that did not require shouting to be heard. She said nothing about the mission. Nothing about Volgoth. She simply said thank you. Moth gave the smallest nod, then returned to his tea. Across the galaxy, the hunters held emergency strategy meetings. Some called for war. Others for silence. The younger officers were terrified. Not by the footage, but by the questions it raised. How many more of those operators did Earth have? Was this the only one? Or just the quietest? Would retaliation only expose more? The debates spiraled with no resolution. Volgoth didn't attend any of them. He remained in his chambers, eyes always locked on that same silent recording. Kirin, now granted temporary diplomatic immunity, gave his first interview on a Terran station. He wore sunglasses indoors, sipped something expensive, and told a half-truthful story about his reasons for defecting. He claimed he didn't fear the hunters. He just preferred being on the winning side. When asked about the man known only as Moth, he laughed and said the universe didn't have a word for him. You don't need a name when silence does the talking. That line trended for weeks. People turned it into memes, artwork, song lyrics. But the real man behind the name never acknowledged it. Never appeared. He had already disappeared again. Somewhere off-world, in a distant facility under construction, another quiet room was being prepared. Reinforced. Hidden. A single chair stood at its center, facing nothing. A faint blue light pulsed in the corner. No guards. No officers. Just silence. Earth wasn't building an army in that room. It was keeping a promise. One day, when someone again confused Earth's stillness for weakness, that door would open. And the galaxy would remember all over again. Not every war needs a battlefield. Some just need a shadow.